Hey, y'all, it's Michelle with SLP Full Disclosure. Welcome to the podcast today. We are joined today by another fellow AMN teletherapist, Natalie Jaramillo. Natalie, thank you so much for joining us. I'm so excited to have another teletherapist on, someone with AMN. Isn't it an amazing job? Don't you just love your job?
It really is. It's pretty niche, and I feel like as the years go on, it gets better.
I know. I absolutely love it. I can't say enough wonderful things about AMN, and teletherapy has been an absolute life changer for me. So I'm so excited to have you on the podcast today. So, Natalie is a speech language pathologist, and she is working in the great southern state of Georgia. So she's down in the South, working in the South where I like where I live. And today we're going to be talking with her about something that I know a lot of us as speech pathologists have been facing, and it's working with bilingual children. Natalie speaks Spanish. And so we're going to be talking about how to prepare for those evaluations. What are some things that we can do in therapy to help our children who are speaking Spanish? I know you may be working with other students who speak other languages. Predominantly in California, I had a lot of Spanish speakers,
Mhm.
Natalie, but I also had a lot of Hmong speakers. So I know you're not a Hmong speaker. And today we're going to be focusing primarily on Spanish. I have just, I've been practicing for 25 years, so I'm so excited to have your expertise and get some tips and tricks to help me in my evaluation and treatment because I always feel so ill prepared. And I
Mhm.
feel like all of my information and all of my training and everything just leaves my mind when I get a student who speaks Spanish because it's the same, but it's also very, very different. And there are some other things that we have to consider
Yeah.
and things that we need to know going into that, correct?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Actually.
Okay. So before we get started, I want to tell you guys a little bit about Natalie. Natalie began her journey in speech language pathology after earning her undergraduate degree from the University of Georgia. She moved to Texas and began working as an SLPA in home health, serving children from birth to age 21. After completing graduate school at Eastern New Mexico University during the post COVID era, she transitioned into teletherapy. Her experience includes working at a therapeutic preschool with children ages 2 to 6 and offering bilingual speech services in a private clinic setting. In August of 2023, she joined AMN Healthcare as a teletherapist, continuing her passion for providing accessible, high quality care to diverse pediatric populations. So, Natalie, I'm so excited to have you here.
Thank you for having
Let's
me.
let's see. What should my first question be? I guess it would be, what is the first thing that we have to consider when we get those referrals of children that are bilingual speakers, specifically the in Spanish? What is the
Yeah.
first thing we need to consider as
Yeah.
speech
So
pathologists?
I feel like obviously in the States, Spanish is a big language that we see. And one of the things that I like to think about and consider is how much exposure they've had to all their languages that they know. So
Hmm.
whether it be English or Spanish, how long they've been exposed. So Spanish has that been their primary language up until they went to kindergarten, or were they exposed to English as well?
Right.
I
And
think that's
how do you go about, is there a specific assessment that you like to do to find out these things? Because I became familiar with something called, let me find the name of it. I want to say
Mhm.
it correctly. The Alberta Language and Development Questionnaire.
Okay.
Are you familiar with that one?
I'm not familiar with that one. So the county
So,
that I'm currently working with, we do an informal kind of evaluation looking at both or screener, I should say. So looking at language and Arctic. And then also we really try to dive deep into the parent in the family interview. Just
that's
to
what
really
that
grasp.
Alberta does.
Yeah.
And it asked, I mean, I don't know. I'm sure there are people out there that are going to be a lot more familiar with it than I am. But I felt so intrusive asking those questions. So when you say dive deep into that family history, what do you mean?
So, history of like education, what it looks
Mhm.
like, childcare, just kind of how they've learned, their milestones, developmental, where they hit it, just all those
Mhm.
sorts of
Yeah.
questions that
And
may help. Yeah.
and those are the kinds of questions that are on the Alberta. And
Okay.
I found myself I just felt like it was kind of intrusive.
Yeah.
Like, what is mom's education? What is dad's
Yeah.
education? And I think and then you have to ask, well, if they didn't finish high school or they didn't go to college,
Yeah.
why? What
Yeah.
is your job? Those kinds of things. So why is it important to know those things?
I think it's super important to know them just to better understand the student that you'll be working with.
Mhm.
So I had recently a family that just came from another country, right? And education was very minimal because they had to work and they had to work to
Mhm.
survive. So just understanding all those different cultural differences is just important. So, if they don't know a certain word for the test, it might just be that they weren't exposed, not
Right.
necessarily that they don't understand.
Right, and
Uh,
that's where those dynamic assessments come into
mhm.
play.
Yeah.
So, let's talk a little bit about those dynamic assessments where you test,
Mhm.
teach, and reteach
Yes.
just to see how that child learns, and
Yeah.
that is something that working with out in California, I had
Mhm.
the opportunity to do, and it is so eye-opening
Yeah.
because you're like, "Wow," just like you said, maybe they don't know the word, but it's
Yeah.
not that they don't know the word, they've never heard the word. So if I tell
Exactly.
them the word,
Yeah.
can they remember it and then use it correctly? So,
Absolutely.
tell me a little bit about the dynamic assessments that you do and why that's important.
Yeah, so we're fortunate enough in the county to kind of tag team. I have another bilingual SLP that's in person. So oftentimes she will go in and do a dynamic assessment just to, again, kind of get a gauge like that body language.
Mhm,
Um, I feel like you can get a lot from a dynamic assessment when it's in person. But for those that we can't do in person, I really love to do like some visuals. So we'll do like slam cards where
mhm,
we'll kind of retell a story. We'll also do some like open ended questions so they can tell me what they know. We have like a beach. You're like, oh, tell me, like, what do you do at the beach?
mhm.
'Cause they might not know.
Right, and it's not that they don't know, it's that
Yeah.
they haven't had those experiences, and
Yes.
it's so hard to figure out with these little bitties what they've been exposed to because that's where you have to bring in the cultural dynamics and you have to bring in the family dynamics
Yeah.
because just because one family goes to the beach and travels and has been on an airplane,
Yeah.
it doesn't mean that another child has had those same experiences. So I think the experiences really play a big role in that.
Yeah.
Now, when you get these referrals, do you have any like go-to assessments that you do?
Mhm.
Specifically, you're like, okay, this is a bilingual child. I know they speak English and Spanish. I'm going to do this one just to kind of avoid some of those biases.
Yeah, so for articulation, we do the GFTA, the GIFTA.
Hmm.
That's just pretty accessible, kind of straightforward.
Hmm.
And then have access to the self in Spanish, which
Hmm.
can be a little long.
I was
However,
going to say it's going
yeah,
to take a
like,
minute. Yeah.
but some of the subtests do a really good job of like giving you really good information, especially like, you're reading a story, the recall, the
Hmm.
comprehension, and even the word finding. So there are some subtests that we tend to like gravitate more towards,
Hmm.
just to kind of really get a representation of their abilities.
Hmm. Now, are you doing English and Spanish evaluations for language and articulation. So you're testing both languages. So that's essentially
Mhm.
4 assessments that you have to give. So I think just
Yeah.
they're so time consuming as well.
So time consuming. So,
Yeah.
if what happens if I see, once we gather like some information from the family, from teachers, if it's kind of leaning towards they are more dominant in a language or
Mhm.
that they prefer it, that they are, I had a student that we started in Spanish and all their responses were in English. So
Yeah.
even though they're bilingual, I just shifted to English. So it's
Mhm.
entirely dependent on the students. And if they're more comfortable, if they know a language but they don't feel comfortable testing, I don't force it on them.
Yeah. When you're doing those, let's start with the articulation because that is what's so intriguing to me. I
Yeah.
love articulation. And I used to not like articulation, but I love it now. It's one of my favorite things to do. Just knowing and under what are some of the primary differences that we need to know as monolingual English speakers
Yeah.
in the Spanish and English pronunciation and sound development.
Yeah. Yeah. There are quite a few.
I
I'm
know.
like similar to I feel like Arctic has kind of grown on me, specifically when I'm working with these bilingual kiddos. Kind of determine what sound they actually can't say or what's just kind of an accent.
Right.
So one that comes to mind, their T's sometimes are pronounced as D's.
These. Mhm.
So if you
Mhm.
have like the number 2, they'll say do. What's another one? Let's see. The phoneme. So for the Z sound, they'll pronounce it as an S.
Yes. Mhm.
So like
Yep.
please will be like please.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
a big one that I see, especially with the K through like 5th grade, is the SH sound for the CH.
Mhm.
So if it's like she, they'll say chi.
Yep.
That's probably a really big one. Are there any that you see that are pretty?
Well, those are the primary ones that I see.
Yeah.
I had the funniest thing ever was I had a little girl that could not she the trill R. I can't do
Ugh,
it.
yeah.
Okay, so I can't do it. I'm from
Yeah.
Mississippi. I can't trill my R.
Mhm.
But when she spoke Spanish, she did not trill her R. But
Interesting.
every English word she said, car, rabbit, anything that had an R, no matter where it was, initial, medial, or final,
Mhm.
she would trill the R. It was
Interesting.
the most interesting thing I had ever seen. So I have had parents ask me, you know, when they're in speech, because we get the referral,
Yeah.
and I wanna talk a little bit about something you said a minute ago, the
Yeah.
errors versus the accent that
Mm,
makes them hard to understand.
yeah.
So, I get lots of referrals, especially for the little bitties, my kindergarten, 1st grade,
Mhm.
sometimes my preschoolers,
Mhm.
um, and there are definite speech sound errors,
Mhm.
but it's predominantly the strong accent
Yeah.
that is causing them to be unintelligible. So, how, as speech pathologists, do we handle that? When we bring them in,
Yeah.
we've done the evaluation, we've done the assessment. Let's talk specifically articulation right now.
Yeah.
And we see that there aren't really any sound errors,
Yeah.
but they are unintelligible when they're speaking in English because they do have that strong accent. How do we handle that? How do we handle that as therapists, and how do we
Mhm.
explain that to parents and teachers?
Yeah, so I love to at the beginning of the year, there's like a sheet and you could kind of find it a lot of like there's just a sheet that I have that kind of shows the differences of like some
Mhm,
of the errors that you will see in articulation. When it comes to working with a child, the student, I love to just kind of have a conversation with them and see, I'm like, can I understand this? Or I'll bring another student and they'll kind of, I like to see them have a conversation.
mhm,
And if one student cannot, understand what the other
mhm.
student is saying, I'll kind of gauge, I'm like, well, what do you think he's saying? And kind of gauge like those errors. It's a little time consuming, but usually in a group,
Right.
you could kind of narrow it down
Yeah,
of like, okay, let's work on what can support you to be a little more intelligible
right.
across the
Because
board.
right, because we're looking at the, education code criteria,
Yes. Yeah.
that standard deviation,
Yeah.
but and I know that conversational speech is a big component of that evaluation process.
Yeah.
Um, how do we work on that as speech pathologists when we've got students they have great language skills,
Yeah.
all of the articulation sounds are there,
Yeah.
they're developed,
Yeah.
but that intelligibility piece is still really low just
Yeah.
because of the accent. Do you have any strategies for us to
Yeah.
work with those students?
Sometimes I'll also consult with the teacher and we'll sometimes practice some drill just to see how that kind of works over time, like just the repetitive of like pronouncing it a little more
Mhm,
intelligible.
mhm.
They still have their little accent sometimes, but just again, just clarifying it. Like you're doing a great job of
Right,
pronouncing it, but we just need to practice a little more.
right. And it's so hard because you don't want to take that part of who they are, their
Yeah.
individuality. You
Yeah.
don't wanna take that away because
Right.
that's who they are,
Exactly.
you know?
Yeah.
Um, and I've got some of my kiddos that have the sweetest little accents in some of the things that they say, and it's adorable, and you
Yeah.
don't wanna change that.
Yeah.
But we also, at the same time, our job I mean, if they can't communicate with their peers and
Yeah.
they can't communicate with their teachers and no one understands them,
Yeah.
then we have to step in and we have to do something.
Yeah.
I would love to get that list of your articulation errors. I would love if we could get that linked in the podcast because I think that would be really helpful. I
Okay.
know it would be really, really helpful for me. I mean, I know them off the top of my head, but
Yeah.
any resources that you have like that, I would love to get those tagged. So
Absolutely.
that would be
Yeah.
great. All right, let's talk about the language.
Mhm.
I think one of the first things that I noticed out in California, and I don't know if I'm gonna say this correctly, but if we said the dog is brown in English,
Mhm.
we would not say it in the same word order in Spanish.
Yeah.
We're gonna put that descriptive word before
Mhm.
the noun,
That's
right?
correct. Yes.
So then when we're giving the self and we're looking at all those language pieces and we're looking at syntax and we're looking at grammar and we're looking at word meaning, we're looking at all of those things and they make those errors. How does the self English and self Spanish, does it distinguish between those errors and does it pull those errors out or does it cover them up
So
based
it
on which test
doesn't
you're giving?
it doesn't necessarily, so for the Spanish, it does switch up the order. In English, it doesn't necessarily cover it up because a lot of this, so it can be challenging. That's another part with
Mhm,
evaluating because they're technically, a lot of the students that I see, they're not really part of the norm of, like,
mhm.
the testing norm that those, like, standard scores. So it's like proceed with caution, kind of.
Yeah,
So
always
kind
you
of to
always
your
have that statement.
discretion.
Yeah, interpret scores with caution, yeah.
Right, yeah. So, yeah, so it really just kinda depends on, they don't ne in English, it's, yes, the descriptor before the noun. In
Yeah.
Spanish, I'm sorry.
And it's always I just love it when they do it, especially the little bitties, and
Yeah,
when they're and you know and
that they
it's so
know.
interesting to see their little brains working,
Right,
and
yeah.
especially those kids that when you speak to them like, my parafacilitator is bilingual, and so she would speak to them in Spanish as they're coming to the speech room,
Mhm.
and then they would get in there with me, and I've got this Southern accent, and I'm
Yeah,
speaking English, and I could ask them questions and talk to them,
sure.
and they would respond to me in Spanish. That
Oh,
has got I mean,
yeah,
that is so interesting
yeah,
to me that
yeah,
they can make that switch, and just like you said with some of the kids you
yeah,
evaluate, you're doing the evaluation in Spanish, but they're responding to you in English.
yeah,
That is
yeah,
fascinating to me. That's a
yes.
pretty high level skill to be
Very
able to
high level,
hone.
yeah, and I think that's one of the things that kind of gets, like, kinda, like, not
Brushed
really,
brushed
especially
under
in
the
the education world, yeah, and it's like, that
overlooked.
is very impressive that you can do that,
Right.
and I think it's so important, like you said, to 'cause so many of them, they get shy or they don't want, they feel, like, shy using their language, or they know that it's not, doesn't come that easy, but really
Mhm,
just, that positive reinforcement, I think, goes a long way.
mhm.
Like, things like that. I was like, "That's amazing that you're understanding me in 2
And
languages and you can
right.
respond."
I know, and being able to make that switch, I think that would be the most difficult thing in the
Mhm.
world to do.
Yeah.
That's why when I have my interpreters and my translators, I'm like, "That's just
Yeah.
wild to me." And that is I will say, and I've said it before, my biggest regret in life
Mhm.
is not learning to speak Spanish.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's my biggest regret.
Yeah.
When we're talking about that the evaluation and the language piece,
Yeah.
and we're looking at these kids that come in and they have a dominant language
Mhm.
9 times out of 10,
Yeah.
and let's say they're coming from a Spanish speaking only home
Mhm.
where they only speak Spanish at home with their caregivers.
Yeah.
That's all they've spoken their entire life.
Mhm.
And then they're put into a general education classroom in the state of Georgia
Yeah.
or possibly in California or anywhere in the United
Yeah.
States where the teacher and all of their peers are speaking English in a language that they don't understand.
Yeah.
And then we get these referrals for a language delay
Mhm.
because they're not doing well academically, they're not
Yeah.
progressing their social and emotional skills, they're not interacting with peers. How do we proceed with those kiddos? Because I think I get those most often than anything.
Yeah.
They're not getting exposed to English anywhere except at school.
Yeah.
And so, is it a language delay or is it just lack of exposure?
Yeah.
So, how do we proceed with those kids?
Yeah.
And do
So,
you see that a lot?
yeah, I feel like, yeah, we definitely, especially, we get a handful where they won't qualify in their
Mhm,
language, but many of them, what we found, do qualify in other areas. So
mhm,
whether that's in writing or in math support, so they are getting some version of support.
mhm.
When it comes to language, it could be quite challenging because we're not English teachers.
Right.
They would really benefit from English courses.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's when you have to really start peeling back the layers
Yes.
and being like, we've done, what do you do when you do the self in English
Yeah.
and you do the self in Spanish? And because a language delay is going to show up
In both.
in
Yeah.
in both.
Yeah.
But if you were to give me the self in English, I think I would do fairly well.
Mhm.
But if you gave me that same test in Spanish, my scores are gonna be really, really low, and then
Right.
it's gonna look like I don't know a whole lot.
Mhm.
When in reality, you're just speaking to me in a language that I don't understand.
Yeah.
So what do we do with those kids?
Yeah. Yeah, and I feel like that's more of the challenge that we're seeing
Facing.
nowadays.
Mhm.
And so for the kiddos that's their situation, they do get speech services. So
Mhm.
I found some students, they're, like, kind of right on the cusp. So even, like, as a support or even, like, through RTI services, that has
Mhm.
been really helpful just to kind of keep track of, like, if they are progressing, how they're progressing. Yeah, because they're kind of like an onion. Because sometimes
Right.
you don't see these things or you're like, "Oh, wow, you actually do need a little more support than we originally thought."
Mhm.
Um, so I kinda like to just keep them on my radar in some capacity.
Mhm.
So for those, yeah, and a lot of them we have a large population that are, like, migrants, so a lot of them haven't really gotten the same education that, let's say, a 5th grader gets
Mhm.
in whatever country that they're coming from. The education systems are vastly different.
Very.
So taking that into consideration, like, well, they've made a lot of progress with what they have.
Right.
So
It's just so hard. Um, so let me ask you this. So I know there are speech pathologists out there who work
yeah,
with multilingual children,
yes.
maybe Spanish,
Mhm.
probably predominantly Spanish, but
Yeah,
maybe Russian, maybe
yeah.
Hmong, whatever it may be. What is your thought on you are a bilingual speech pathologist?
Mhm.
You're very lucky, and I'm so envious of you.
Yeah.
I am a monolingual speaker.
Mhm.
What what are your thoughts on evaluating those children
Mhm.
as a bilingual speech pathologist, and you can do both languages,
Yeah.
versus someone like me, who,
Mhm.
when I do my evaluations, I'm going to have to use an interpreter.
Right. Yeah.
So, do you see any difference in that evaluation process when
Mhm.
you do it as a bilingual speaker versus when someone as a monolingual speaker
Yeah.
like myself would use
Yeah.
an interpreter?
What
How does
I
that
have
impact those
seen,
scores?
yeah, no, that's a great, point to bring up. What I have seen, again, that cultural aspect, I feel like doesn't quite get translated as
Mhm.
well or, like, passed on
And what do you mean by that?
in that sense of, like, what I've seen is, like, I'm not the expectation is low. Like, I'm just like, whatever. I have a mindset of, like, you know what? Show me what you can do. I don't wanna find what you can't do. I
Right.
wanna find what you can do. And I feel like sometimes it's very, like, kind of by the book where it's like, this is the standardized test. It's like really taking into consideration those dynamic assessments. The Yeah, just the informal assessment, I think, also plays a big role. Even if you are using
Mhm.
an interpreter, I
Mhm.
think you can find a lot of information outside of just the standardized test.
I love that, Natalie. Focusing and trying to find out what they can do
Yeah.
when you start that process,
Yeah.
and in doing that, you are gonna find out what their weaknesses are.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
When you find out what they can do, what
Yeah.
they can't do kinda comes to the surface.
Yes. Yes.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
Do you have any specific strategies that you use in your therapy with kids who are bilingual to
Yeah.
kinda help them pick up those skills?
Yeah, I just love to find what they're, like, interested in,
Mhm.
especially with teletherapy. A lot of it is, like, conversational to begin because I have found that, like, once you kinda get to know, like, what they like and their interests, they really start to open up.
Right.
Yeah, so that is a really key piece, especially with the population of, like, whatever other language they know, they're coming from different cultures.
Mhm.
And I think sometimes they could be a little closed off. It's like, "Well
Mhm.
well, we're here to help," but they're not used
Right.
to that help.
Right.
So really taking the time to find their interests.
Right. I always let my kids teach me, and this
Yeah.
brings me to a point I wanted to say, a little story. I love telling stories.
Yeah.
So I always let my kids who speak Spanish or Hmong teach me words in their language. So
Oh.
whether it's mostly foods, I remember pepino and fresas. I don't know why I know strawberry and cucumber, but
Yep.
those are two that I always remember. I usually forget the others, but colors and things like that, animals.
Yeah.
And they have a really good time teaching me. I'm like,
Yeah.
"Okay, what are you gonna teach me today?" So that's how
That's
I start,
great. Yeah.
especially with teletherapy. Teach me a new Spanish word today,
Yeah.
and I let them teach me, and then we get into our lesson.
Yeah.
But what I have, you know, the Hispanic culture, and I've learned a lot about the Hispanic culture from my
Mhm.
friend Genesis out in California, who is one of my dearest friends, and I talk to her every day. She
Mhm.
was a parafacilitator with me for several years,
Yeah.
and I learned a lot about the culture, and cooking and family time is
Yeah.
really important in the
Yeah.
culture.
Yeah.
So typically when they come in, I'm like, "What did you do over the weekend?"
Mhm.
And they would say, "Oh, well, I went to my aunt's house," and they don't what's the word aunt in Spanish?
Tia.
Tia? Tia.
Mhm.
I went to my tia's house, and my mom, my dad, everybody, my grandma, my grandpa, everybody was there. And I'm like, "Well, what did you eat?"
Yeah.
And they tell me this really long, like, elaborate
Yeah.
Spanish dish
Yeah.
that they've made.
Yeah.
Now, when they're teaching me words like, cow and dog, perro, vaca, those things, I can say them.
Yeah.
And what I found myself doing was when they would come in and they would say, "Oh, well, we cooked blah, 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 blah," and it's this really long
Mhm.
Spanish dish. I said, "Well, I'm not even gonna try to say that because that would be really hard."
Yeah.
And a light bulb went off in my head. And I was like, "You know what? If I'm intimidated
Yeah.
to speak their
Yeah.
language, what makes me think that they aren't intimidated to speak my
Mhm.
language?"
Yeah.
And it was such a light bulb moment for me,
Yeah.
and I was like, "You know what? I'm gonna be a little bit gentler in how
Mhm.
we go about this,"
Mhm.
because it was a really profound moment
Yeah.
in my career, and it happened, like, the first year that I was working
Yeah.
with a lot of bilingual children. And it has really shifted my thought process,
Mhm.
and when I have these kids because cookie is easy for me to say, and milk, and juice, and I need a break, and those kinds of things, but that
Yeah.
doesn't mean that it's easy for them, and it
Yeah.
can be if it's intimidating for me, it's gonna be intimidating for them.
Right. Yeah. No, I agree. And I feel like a lot of times our job it's to, show a lot of compassion and support.
Mhm.
Like we're here to, I think sometimes they don't feel like we're here to help them. They
Yeah,
feel like this is job like I don't want to do this.
right.
But just kind of building up their confidence in whatever language they're working on, I think is really important.
Yeah, and I tell them all the time how cool it is that they speak 2
Yeah.
languages.
Yeah.
I'm like, "You speak 2 languages. I only speak 1.
Yeah.
So you have to help me so I can help you
Right.
'cause you know more than I know.
Yeah.
So let's help one another." That's kind of how the approach that I take,
Yeah.
and
I
it
think
really
that's
helps
great.
them open up a
Yeah.
lot.
Yeah.
Natalie, it's been great having you on the podcast today. I
It's
definitely
wonderful.
wanna get your, handouts linked if we possibly could. But I always ask my guests at the end, what advice a lot of new
Mhm.
grads, a lot of CFs listen to this podcast, but then
Yeah.
there are people like me who've been around the block,
Mhm.
um, that are really seasoned. What advice do you have for SLPs listening to become comfortable working with a child who is bilingual?
Yeah. I think it's important to know that you're not alone. There's always a team behind you in whatever setting you may be in. So kind of reaching out for help is always my first kind of don't be afraid to ask for help.
Mhm.
Use the interpreter as needed. And sometimes even learning a few phrases here and there really go a long way.
Mhm.
Even if you don't know a ton, it's okay. But I
Right.
think sometimes students and clients and just patients from all over, if they see a small effort, I feel like that really makes them feel comfortable. And I think you could get a lot more out of them after.
I love that.
Yeah.
That is so awesome. Natalie, it has been awesome meeting you.
Yes.
I
Likewise.
definitely love meeting other teletherapists with AMN
Yes.
because I know that I love my job and it has been just an amazing blessing in my life. So I really appreciate you joining us today and
Absolutely.
sharing all of the tips and tricks and the knowledge on working with these kiddos
Yeah.
because we're seeing it more and more often everywhere. And I'm not going to hold it against you that you're a Georgia Bulldog because I went to Ole Miss. So
Oh my
not gonna
goodness.
hold I had to bring that up. So,
Yes.
um, Yes. So thank you so much for joining. I hope you guys enjoyed the podcast today. I'm going to do my best to get those handouts from
Yep.
Natalie and get them tagged in the podcast.
Absolutely.
You guys have a great day, and we'll talk to y'all soon. Thank you for tuning in to SLP Full Disclosure. You can learn more about this episode and our show on our website at amnhealthcare.com. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with a friend and subscribe to our show on your favorite podcast platform. You can also find show updates and SLP opportunities on our Instagram at AMN Allied. Special thanks to AMN Healthcare for making this show possible. See y'all next time.